welcome everybody. Poirun, bienvenidos a todos. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us for part 2 of this wonderful two-part series, Sephardic Solution to the Aguna Crisis, with our dear friend, Rabbi Haleva. Just a reminder, this wonderful series is part of the Sephardic Digital Academy program through the Sephardic Jewish Brotherhood of America, a whole host of other wonderful programs on Sephardic Halakha, Torah, contemporary issues like the Aguna crisis, as well as history, Ladino 101, and so much more. If you're ever interested in finding out more of our classes, please feel free to check them out at sephardicbrotherhood.com/Sephardic Digital Academy, or by emailing us at info@sephardicbrotherhood.com. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our dear friend, Rabbi Haleva. Whenever you're ready, Chacham.
Okay, good. Let me do share screen here, and here we are. Okay, good evening, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. This is the second class in my little series on Sephardic solutions to the Aguna problem. So let me just review a little bit in case this is the first time you're in this series, or if you don't remember everything. So an Aguna is a woman who is anchored. Oren is an anchor, and Aguna is a woman who's anchored, which means she can't move. She can't move because she's married to somebody, but he's gone or they're split up, and he will not give her a divorce. And without the divorce, she can't really do anything. So we went over some early solutions, one of which is coercion. And the other is the modern solution of the Rabbinical College Conference of America, I guess they call the RCA, which is a prenup, which is tries to be a binding American contract, but pretty much all it can do is impose financial penalties, let's say in this case, the husband, if he fails to appear. That doesn't help the woman if she doesn't appear. So in normal American courts, if you sue for divorce and you serve the husband and you can't find him, all you have to do is tell the court, well, I couldn't find him. The court will grant you a divorce without his participation. You can get a divorce by default if the husband fails to appear. In Jewish law, unfortunately, you cannot do that. So while the man can get out of the marriage anytime he wants, and under Sephardic law, you can marry multiple women anyway, so there's no real need for the man to have a divorce, the woman could be stuck. And as I went over last time, around the end of World War I, a lot of people were leaving the Ottoman Empire. Most of our grandparents came here from the Ottoman Empire for Spanish-speaking Jews in the US around that time. Like my papa came in 1915, and many people I know came around the same time, the teens or the 20s or the 30s at the latest. So the Beit Din of Istanbul in 1929 was faced with a problem. What do we do with all these men who go to the New World? They get on a boat, they leave, they claim they're going to bring the wife and maybe the children if she has them, but they don't send for her and she's stuck waiting here. What does she do? This was such a problem that they decided to make a change in the way people got married, and they instituted the first time a condition to be recited twice. At the time of the ashuar, which is when the man sends over jewelry and sheets and bedding and things like that to the woman before the wedding, and the woman's house, there's a party and it's on display. People from Syria call it a swani. Ladino-speaking Jews call it an ashuar. I don't know the etymology of ashuar. It's obviously I think it's a Spanish term. So, and also at the time of the ashuar and at the time of the wedding itself, they recite a condition. And the Beit Din of Istanbul issued this opinion of the entire court, which they wrote up in 60 pages in this little pamphlet, which they issued in 1929. The Istanbul Beit Din's analysis was that you could make a condition in weddings, in kiddushin. While there are some people who say you cannot make a condition in nisu'in, that means you can't condition the state of marriage after it's been entered into on something. They show that that's only rabbinic, and they assert the power to get around it. That's one of the vulnerabilities of this teshuvah, which may explain why I think it was ignored. I've never heard anybody in the Orthodox world even refer to it. But had they read it, maybe they would be a little bit concerned because it attempts to create a condition at the time of the marriage, unlike other conditions. So this is the condition. I will read the actual text of it in a moment, just to review it. But one word first about conditions. In marriage conditions, you can say anything you want to, on condition that you give me $100,000, on condition that you're married to me, on condition that my father agrees. You're married to me on condition that you have a field and you give me the field, anything like that. But once the condition is either fulfilled or not fulfilled, they're either married or not married. And once it's done, it's done. You're either in the state of being married or you're not. What we're going to read in a moment for review is the Istanbul's Beit Din is a little bit carrying that another step forward. Here's what they said. So let's see. Dehaino, that is, in other words, Ya'ani in Arabic or Quiere decir in Spanish. Dehaino, that means, summing up what they said before. Shebe'et shesholeach hatan lechallato hatabat l'shem sablunot. At the time the man sends the ring over to the girl's, the bride's house for the sake of sablonot is like, means sheets, or means bedding. It means what you might call a trousseau, which is the practice. Everybody does that before the wedding here in our city, which is Istanbul in Turkey. And then a second time you recite the following condition. At the time he hands her the ring from his hand to her hand for the purposes of kiddushin, or becoming married under Jewish law. And that's the part we all seen many, many times. The husband hands to the wife a ring. He recites a phrase that says, Hare'at mekudeshet li. Here, by this ring, you are wedded to me, Kedat Moshe v'Yisrael, according to the law of Moses in Israel, and she becomes his wife. If you've been to many weddings, many times, the Sephardic weddings, they will say Mekudeshet b'siman tov, Mekudeshet b'siman tov, after he gives her the ring, which means she is married to him, and it should be a good sign for both of them. Now, that's what, so the Beit Din in Istanbul said, at the time you do both of those things, the pre-marriage display of all the gifts, the trousseau, and again, and so I think they would bring the ring to her house, and then they would bring the ring back for the wedding. And then he would give her the ring in the synagogue and recite the formula I just said. So at both of those times, he's supposed to recite the following condition. She'im hayot tihiyeh kadavar hazeh. If the following should ever happen. Shebehemshech hayamin, that after many days, in the continuation of days, yasim ha'ish lederech pe'amav, the husband goes on travels. He travels somewhere. B'li reshut ishto, without his wife's permission. Or gam im yelech b'reshutaha lizman mugbal. Suppose he says, honey, I have to go, let's say we're in Istanbul, I have to go to India to buy goods. I'm a jeweler. I have to go to the Javeri market in Bombay, and I'll be back in about 8 months. I'm taking the boat, and I'll be back in 8 months. So she agrees. And then, but he stays in Bombay without her permission, for longer than the agreed upon condition between them. For example, let's say he stays 3 years. He was supposed to say 8 months, he stays 3 years. Or if events occur, or for whatever reason, a woman who wants to be divorced can go to the court and ask them to direct the husband to give the divorce. Now, in the old Sephardic world, there was a community Beit Din, a community court in every city: Istanbul, Izmir, Gallipoli, Edirne, Saloniki, etc., etc. Because in the Ottoman Empire, you have to understand, each religious community had some kind of autonomy. They call that, I believe, the Tanzimat system. So the Ottoman government did not get involved in personal relationships between the members of one religious community. That's why you had a Haham Bashi. The Haham Bashi's job was to be the interface between the Ottoman government, the Sultan's court, and his people. He represented the Jewish people to the Ottoman court. So, you know, unlike the United States or any other country where we live today, in the Ottoman Empire, you did not pay taxes as an individual. There was no Form 1040, there was no filing, there was no IRS. Your community was expected to pay a certain sum of money every year to the government, and your own community had internal committees that would assess the ability to pay of each and every household, and they would make an assessment. And of course, everybody was incentivized to appear as poor as possible and to appear to have made as least money as they could claim from their business. But because the committee was formed out of businessmen, not rabbis, not teachers, but businessmen, they knew who's doing what kind of business and how much it would earn in a year. They would set up your taxes. So in the Ottoman Empire, we had some autonomy as a nation. We weren't individuals, citizens of Turkey. There was no Turkey. There was the Ottoman Empire. And we were one nation out of a few. There were the Christians, the Eastern Orthodox Christians mostly. There was the Jews, and of course, everybody else was the Muslims. So suppose you went to the Jewish court in your city, the woman, and brought the husband, summoned him to court. The husband either would not accept going to court, or he wouldn't even listen to the judges to accept their sentence or their decision. Or another, so there's many possible things that happen, and at the end we're going to say what happens if they do. But another option, or if yara sheyamut ha'ish bilti zera something kodesh, I don't remember what the sheen is, if you die without children. And now the woman has to marry her dead husband's brother, who she may not like. Or this later person, this brother, nobody knows where he is. Now, under Jewish law, if you are married to somebody and he dies without children, and he has siblings who also don't have children, you are automatically betrothed to the Yavam. And the only way out is if the Yavam and this prospective bride have a Halisa ceremony. So you're kind of stuck. So this is another condition. And what if this Yavam is nowhere to be found? This brother-in-law is nowhere to be found. You're still, if he's alive, you are legally his, and there's no way out of that. So if you can't find him, that's another version of being an Aguna. Or he refuses to give her a halisa. Maybe he wants to marry her. For whatever reason. I don't know what that means. Or if something happened and the husband is insane. Holeh haruach means sicknesses of the spirit, but by that we mean insanity. Or beholi debkei, as Haham Aryeh Greenberg pointed out last week, it means if you have a contagious illness such that she can't live with him, maybe it's never going away. Or shekavar haya lo haholi hazeh mikodem hanisuin v'lo noda la'isha. Or the man had this sickness, this contagious sickness. I think it means actually also a sickness that doesn't cure. So you're always in a sickly state. Because we don't have any indication here that she's worried about catching it. The problem is he's stuck with it and he can't shake it. Like Parkinson's disease or multiple sclerosis or one of those. Let's say he had the sickness before and he never told her. For all of these reasons, she could go to court and demand a divorce, but he has to obey the dictate of the court. או בעניין אחר, or in some other matter, as follows. שאי אפשר לה לדור עם נחש בכפיפה אחת. Some other situation or context which makes it impossible for her to dwell with him. And the Hachamim here use a metaphor. It's impossible for her to live with a snake under one small roof. Azai, accordingly, if any of these conditions occurs, retroactively, from the occurrence of this problem, he's in Bombay, he's not coming back. He has a sickness and it's not going away. He has a sickness that he covered up. He dies and you're now supposed to marry his brother. Any of these things, or she doesn't want him anymore, she goes to court and he refuses to give the divorce. In any of these instances, retroactively, from the date of identification of this condition, the kiddushin are no longer valid. And whatever monies, like that ring we spoke about, he gave her qua kiddushin, as the triggering object to wed her to him. Lo yehu ella matana be'alma. They are now recategorized, not as kesef kiddushin, not as the money or the valuables which sealed the marriage, rather a present, means she doesn't have to give it back. V'lo tistarech mimenu get kiritut. And moreover, because now we're declaring the original kiddushin to be void retroactively. In English, we would say void ab initio. They're void from the very beginning. They didn't happen. She doesn't need a get. And she doesn't need from the brother-in-law the halisa ceremony. But they have one caveat, because you could tell they're a little concerned. And why are they concerned? Like I said before, in all the legal examples in the Talmud about a condition to a marriage, it's a condition precedent, what we call in English. It means it's a condition that needs to be fulfilled in order to become married. What we're talking about here is something different. We're getting married subject to the non-occurrence of a condition subsequent. If I never get sick, if you never find out that I covered up a sickness, if I never die and leave you childless so that you have to marry my brother, if I agree, if I come back from my business ventures, business travels in the time that we agreed, and if you sue me in Bedin in Istanbul, I will show up and I will accept the dictate of the court. If none of these bad things happen, then we stay married. However, if one of them does happen, then the marriage is, we pull the plug on the marriage retroactively ab initio. That is a kind of a new animal. And that some people call tenai b'nisu'in. It's not the Bedin here is saying this is a condition on the marriage itself, not a condition on the state of marriage pertaining between them. But it's very close, and there are sources which cast a shadow on what we call a tenai b'nisu'in. We in Jewish law, we have kiddushin, that's the giving of the ring or the money. And the nisu'in is when she comes to live with you. And you have to write her a ketubah, and then she comes to your house, and there's a second party. It used to be separated by 12 months. Nowadays, it's separated by a half an hour, perhaps. And so it appears that we're making a tenai, a condition on the state of marriage, which is actually the nisu'in. They're a married couple for as long as none of these bad things happen. But if one of these triggering events should occur in 5, 10, 15, 25 years, the marriage is void ab initio. That's the vulnerability of this Istanbuli condition. And so that's why they wrote the following. They had some final comments. Ulam, however, kol ze eno ella im en lanu senif acher lebatel hakiddushin. All of this protocol is only to be used if we have no other, literally this means a branch, but it means no other avenue to undo the marriage. And only because of the general power of a Jewish court to undo kiddushin we have come to this. Of course, you don't have the power unless you're a national bet din with semicha. So they're kind of saying there was the power. We don't have the absolute power, but we do if we create a condition at the time of the marriage that gives us the power because it's by contract. So some people had an issue with what we're doing here. So they're referring to the naked assertion of the power to annul a marriage. We don't have annulment, but they're saying here, but what we're doing here, we have many avenues, which are Rabbim, Hashuvim, many and important, according to a majority of all the rabbis, means we have a general consensus that anybody could do this if we make an affirmative declaration of the condition at the time of the marriage, and they doubled it and they said also do it at the time of the Swani Ashuar. The Savrem Maranan, that all our masters hold or believe, they call Shehayu Tinaim Benehem Bishad Kiddushin, Velonit Kaimu Hatanaim de Kiddushin Betelin, that for all husband and wife, that they had between them at the time of the marriage conditions, and the conditions were not fulfilled, the kiddushin, the marriage, is null and void. And even according to some of the poskim, some of the rabbis who write responsa, hamahmirim, who are stringent, eno ela mishum humra be'alma, they are opposing our scheme only for reason, just to be strict in general. And the Sephardim really were aware that in Europe there were people who were strict for strict sake, and they didn't approve of that. They tried to find the correct law, but if the law allowed you a way to get out of a problem, they weren't shy. Whereas some people, and especially after the Reform movement, the Orthodox became very, very stringent in Hungary and parts of Germany and Eastern Europe, and they, according to the Sephardim at the time, they felt that this was stringent for stringent sake, and they weren't going to go along with it. There is no doubt the haskamat hafkaat v'hafkarat kiddushin ba'inyan zeh mo'il u'mehanel l'chulei alma. According to everybody except for these extra stringent folks, if you make this kind of condition, it undoes the marriage, and we have the power to do it. And let's say, Hadavar pashut denachon v'yashar pa'olenu. The matter is understood by everybody. Denachon, that it's valid, v'yashar, and it would say in Ladino, derecho, it's the right thing to do. Yashar means straight. In English, it doesn't mean the same as derecho, which is do it the right way. We can also say justo, what we've done. V'yafeh dananu, yafeh zakinu l'taken tekana zo, and we have judged beautifully. And we have had the zechut, the merit, to l'taken tekana zo, to fix this fix, l'tovat benot Israel, for the benefit of Jewish women, shelo titlachedna b'chablei ha'agun, that they should never be conquered or imprisoned by the shackles of agunot. Agun is the noun. And also we have succeeded, and we have the zahuth, we have the merit to remove this obstacle from the pathway of our nation. And God should implement this with good advice, and he should save us from all kind of errors. Amen. And I told you last time, look who signed on. We have Yitzhak ben Eliezer, don't know who he is. Rafael David Saban, who later became the chief rabbi, he signed Sephardi Tahor. Yitzhak Shaki, Yaakov Arguete, and Moshe ibn Habib, Sephardi Tahor. I'm not going to read this part, but the chief rabbi then endorsed. So these five were on the court. This chief rabbi, Bejirana, was not on the court at the time. I mean, he could have been, but he didn't join in the decision. But he was the chief rabbi, so he endorses what the court did. And that's what he says in a very nice, poetic way. And then he signs his name, Haim Moshe Bejirano. He's the chief rabbi in Turkey. Did anybody oppose it? So the Turkish Bedin circulated this proposal. That's why we have this 60-page booklet to all the Sephardic communities. And that was the general practice. I don't know if you ever heard of this, but there was a Haham in Cairo, Egypt, named Rafael Aharon ben Shimon, Moroccan family, chief rabbi in Cairo. Really, really wise. Really wise. Like I don't know, an MIT professor of engineering in relation to a regular engineer. That kind of wisdom, that kind of outstanding talent. And he noticed that in Cairo, the Tibila, the banyo, the mikveh, was in the older part of town. And because there was not a lot of rain in Egypt, they had to dig near the Nile to get groundwater. So what you had was these long, spirally staircase, multiple level structures. And the woman had to walk down all these stairs. And at the bottom was a mikveh, tebila. And a lot of them stopped going. So Rafael Aharon ben Shimon said, I have to fix this problem if possible. Just at that time, the Cairo waterworks, using some Jewish engineers and non-Jewish, but some of the Jewish engineers were primary in the project, created a water system with an automatic pump that would suck water from the Nile and circulate it through a piping system to all parts of the city, or to many parts. So you could turn on water for the first time. You had running water indoors. You didn't need a well outside behind your kitchen off of your patio, but inside your house, you could have a bathtub with running water coming out of a faucet. He has a 70-page teshuvah, which the engineers who worked on the project, the waterworks in Cairo, drew for him the inflow and the outflow of the water, one color blue, one color red. And his conclusion was, you could use this bathtub as a tibila, a bathtub which is the proper size, and you fill it up from your faucet in your house, and the faucet is getting its water from the new Cairo waterworks, which has huge pumps that suck water from the Nile and push it through the piping system. That is a valid tebila. Now, that's a kind of an innovative idea. So in order to garner support, he sent the draft teshuvah to all the hachamim that he knew of in all the Sephardic communities. And when he published it, there was 35 to 40, I don't remember how many exactly, hachamim from Damascus, from Argentina, from Israel, several cities in Israel, from Alexandria in Egypt, from Morocco, from Baghdad, from all over the Sephardic world. They all agreed with his teshuvah. Even some of them wrote their own teshuvot, short ones, where they go through the main issues and say, and I agree completely with what Rafael Aharon ben Shimon did. I've read some of them. One of them is very nice. It's from the Abedin, the head of the Jewish court in Damascus. His name was Yitzhak Abul Afia. He has excellent teshuvot himself, and he endorsed this. So it was the practice of the Sephardic Hachamim, when they made an innovative teshuvah, they would send it around to all the other Hachamim and all the other communities that they knew of to solicit approval or feedback, or approval subject to some feedback, something like that. So that's what happened here. This teshuvah was sent from Istanbul all around the Sephardic world. There was someone in Cairo. He was, I think, right before Rafael Aharon ben Shimon, the one I told you about, or right after, I'm not sure. His name was Yaakov Moshe Toledano. That's an obvious Sephardic name. Family comes from Toledo. Toledanos are found in Morocco, but they're also found in Turkey and Greece. There were some Toledanos from Rhodes, etc. So the only serious criticism against the Pesach came from Yaakov Moshe Toledano. He got it when he was in Egypt. He reviewed it, and he said the following: the conditions stipulated in this proposal, the ones I just read, all these things, if this happens and I die without kids and you are now betrothed to my brother, or if I get sick, or if I covered up a sickness, or if I go to Bombay and I never come back, etc., etc., etc. These are too specific. Therefore, you're going to have a fight as to what it means. Does the conditions listed there in the Istanbuli Teshuvah, does that cover the situation that this woman is bringing up? Yes or no? Too difficult to say. So he said, for example, the stipulation that the marriage can be terminated in case of the husband's sickness. That was the holy debkei, if the guy has this long-term sickness that doesn't go away. What happens? Different medical opinions could agree or disagree as to whether the husband is really sick within the meaning of this condition or not. So Toledano proposed, let's change the condition. Let's make it general. We'll make it subject to the evaluation of the then sitting Bet Din in that woman's town. So according to the opinion of the local Bet Din, this would be an adequate proposal and worthy ordinance that the Bet Din could terminate the marriage even after the wedding. That's even after the nisuin. Kanas means to bring her into your house, and conjugal relations at any time that the Bet Din comes to the conclusion that it is proper and necessary to terminate it. In other words, you don't have to say, they don't have to find any facts. They can just say, it's proper and necessary to terminate this marriage, and we are. And if you make that condition at the time of the wedding, you say, this wedding, this marriage is conditioned upon, these kiddushin are conditioned upon that the Bet Din of our town never finds that our marriage should be dissolved. But if they do, even if we've been married for 5, 7, 10, 20 years, if they decide that it's proper and necessary to terminate it, the marriage is poof, void ab initio. And he said, if you accept that, this I submit to the approval of the great rabbinic authorities of our generation, that they should pass judgment on this proposal and decide whether to accept it or reject it. And how do we know this all happened? Because this is his book of responsa called Hayam Hagadol. Yam means Yod Mem, Yaakov, Moshe. See how it goes? So he chose the famous phrase Hayam Hagadol, which refers to the Mediterranean. So he's a rabbi in Cairo at the end of the Mediterranean, at the Nile Delta, and he calls his book Hayam Hagadol. We get that. And he has a teshuvah there where he brings to everybody's attention, I reviewed the proposal from the Istanbuli Bet Din, and this was my response back to them. Okay. As I told you though, the only wrinkle here is that this is a condition subsequent, which if it occurs, voids the kiddushin from the beginning. That's still a little bit of a wrinkle. Now, let's say you do it, and let's say we do it with the modification of Yaakov Moshe Toledano. We don't have city Bet Dins anymore. The people who came from Turkey to the United States never established a Bet Din anywhere. By Bet Din, we don't mean 3 rabbis who get together to give a kosher certification to a wedding in a certain hotel. We don't mean that. Like in Seattle, they used to say a Bet Din of Seattle, but all they ever did was they got together for conversions, they got together for divorces, but they never judged any case, ever. So I don't know if under the condition of Yaakov Moshe Toledano, you could judge whether something is proper and necessary if you've never been a sitting judge. That's the problem. You have to be an actual dayan. Like there's a Sephardic name, which is very common, called dayan. It's equivalent to the Ashkenazi name Bezdin, which means like you sat in a Bet Din, which they call Bezdin. But in the United States, there has never been a regular sitting Bet Din of Sephardim. I don't know if there is for anybody, where you could take a case to them and they could judge it like they did from time immemorial through World War I in Istanbul, in Izmir, in Cairo, in Alexandria, in Damascus, in Aleppo, in Baghdad, in Tetuan, in Casablanca, etc., Tangier, in all those cities we did that. Even in Goa in India, we had that, but we don't have it here. And I don't think there exists in Israel even. There's rabbinic courts, but they're very limited jurisdiction courts. They're not general jurisdiction courts. So today, this might be a problem. So is there a better alternative? Yes. Nobody wrote a teshuvah about this. I am writing a teshuvah about this, but I'm taking my time because I'm in no rush, and I don't think anybody's going to do much except criticize it unless we had an actual Sephardic Beit Din. So this works, but I think you need, we have to step up and recapture or reestablish the Beit Din, having a court, having a legal system and judges and jurists. And we have to teach people. If we don't have people who are ready to be dayanim, then we have to open up a yeshiva to train dayanim. Who is doing that in Israel now? Rason Arusi, who's the leader, I would say, of the Baladi, the home country Yemenites. He's the chief, he's the rabbi of Kiryat Ono. I think he's also on the Beit Din of Jerusalem, and he established a yeshiva to train dayanim. So is there an even better alternative? Yes. And this is like almost magical. So I don't know if you've ever heard of, I'm sure you've heard of it, power of attorney. So you can give people a power of attorney for a specific act. Like I give you a power of attorney to sell my building in Detroit. And it's valid for 18 months. And you can do anything necessary to sell my building. You could sign the papers, you could hire a realtor, you could go to the closing, all that. But that's it. Or there's something called a general power of attorney, which says you could do anything that I could do. I give you absolute authority to act in my place and stead. That's a general power of attorney. Most people don't use it. Some people give it to their wife or their children. This is similar to that in a way. So we all know that only the husband can give the divorce. Can the husband pre-give a divorce in escrow to the wife that she holds as kind of the custodian of the divorce, and she has the power to exercise the divorce, in other words, give it to herself or say that it's valid at some future time? Yes, yes. That's part of Talmudic laws of divorce. It's called a get hatalui b'ma'aseh, and that's the better alternative. And let me go through that here. So you give the get at the time of the wedding that empowers the woman to trigger it. This is from Maimonides, Mishneh Torah. המגרש את אשתו לאחר זמן קבוע, הרי זו מגורשת כשיגיע הזמן שקבע. If you say, I'm giving you the divorce now, but it's only effective in 3 years from today. It is effective in 3 years from today. והרי זה דומה לתנאי, but this is similar to a condition in divorce, ואינו תנאי, but at the same time it isn't. It is and it isn't. דומה לתנאי שהיא מתגרשת כשיגיע הזמן שקבע. It's similar to a condition in the following way. It is operative when the time comes, the set time comes. But it's not a condition. When you divorce on a tenai, if the tenai is fulfilled, then you're divorced. But this thing stands in limbo, so they could still be married until the time that the 3-year period expires. לפיכך, המגרש על תנאי צריך לכפול תנאו, וזה אינו צריך לכפול דברו, ולא לשאר משפטי התנאים שבארון. If you use this specific time. But what if they don't want to be divorced necessarily? We just want the wife to have the power to dissolve the marriage without the husband. What would you do there? So we have another law. Kesed, ha'omer li'ishto, if you tell your wife, hare ze gitech, this is your divorce, you give her the actual bill of divorce written according to all the requirements, v'lo titgareshi bo ella le'achar sheloshim yom, but you're not divorced with it until 30 days pass, ena mechoreshet bo ella le'achar sheloshim yom. She is not divorced until the 30 days pass. ואם מת הבעל, או עבד הגט, או נשרף, בתוך 30 יום, אינה מגורשת. Because the get, although given now, doesn't operate until the 30-day time period elapses, if he dies before it elapsed, or it was lost, or it got burned up, she's not divorced, because on the 30th day, the husband has to be able to be legally capable of divorcing her, and he's gone. Either he's gone or the document is gone. What if she received it and put it like in the public place, like she hid it somewhere? That's called the sides of the public area. Like she hid it, people hide stuff in the airport, or they hide stuff at a park under a bench that only they know is there. So suppose she took it, the 30 days came, and it was hidden, and after that it got lost. Then she is divorced. And she put it in a guarded or protected place, not in the general Reshut Harabim, the general public domain, but on the side of it, like under a park bench, in an airport locker, etc. And because places adjacent to the public domain, they're not the same as the public domain. If you put it in the public place, you're not guarding it in any way, so you haven't preserved it in your possession. But this example you did. Now here's the kicker, though. This is the one we would use. So we just got finished studying the laws of divorce after a certain lapse of time. I'm giving you the divorce now. It's in your hand. I have nothing further to do with it. You guard it as long as it's still around on the 30th day, and I'm still around, you're divorced. What about another avenue where not time, but act? What if you condition, or you hung, not condition, but you hung the divorce on the occurrence of a ma'aseh, of an act? That has the same legal force like the ones we just read if you divorce after a certain time period. Kesad. Whenever you see the word kesad in the Mishnah, in the Talmud, or here in Maimonides' restatement of the Talmud, it means what's the form, what's the actual implementation. Give me a real world context where this legal principle is implemented. Well, for example, you told your wife, here is your bill of divorce. But you are not divorced by it until you give me $200, 200 zuz. Now she has the power to trigger the divorce. It's in her hand. It's all valid. It's delivered. It's signed. It's sealed. It's delivered. She's got it. The only thing is that she has to comply with the triggering event. If she does the triggering event, she's divorced. And this is not like a regular condition, so he doesn't have to double it. In Jewish law, if you say a condition, you have to recite it both in the negative and the positive, which would mean you're divorced by this divorce if you give me 200 zuz. But if you don't give me 200 zuz, you're not divorced. That's the negative and the positive. You don't have to say that. You just say it once. If you give me 200 zuz, you are divorced. And it does, the other rules of conditions on a get do not apply. He didn't divorce on a condition. Because there's no condition or not. If she decides to do it, she does it. And if she doesn't decide to do it, she's not yet divorced. She can trigger the condition anytime she wants in the future. So here's a condition that I think would work. Here's your divorce, but you are not divorced by it until you file a petition for divorce naming me as respondent in any court of the United States, and 90 days passes without your having dismissed the lawsuit. So if you file a suit for divorce and 90 days go by and you still haven't dismissed it, then the divorce is operative. So if you have a big fight and she says, I'm filing for divorce, but then she realizes she doesn't want to be divorced, she could still dismiss it. So now she has all the control on the divorce. She could never be an Aguna, and you give her this divorce at around the time of the wedding. This is not a divorce on condition, which has special rules, and you're going to see one big rule that would ruin our plan. What's the big difference between divorcing on a condition, like if X happens, or this, that I'm giving you the divorce now, and it's 100% valid and delivered to you. There's no preconditions to it, but you have to do, or somebody has to do an act. If you divorce on a condition, there's a divorce that's operative from the time you give it, but it's not completed until you fulfill the condition. Therefore, when the condition is fulfilled, she is divorced if the bill of divorce, the document, is still in existence, even though she doesn't have it. You don't have to have possession of it at the time of the conditional event because she already had delivery for the purposes of divorce. And if she married somebody else before the condition was fulfilled, because there's enough of a divorce there, she doesn't have to leave the second fellow. However, if they sleep together, this is with the husband. If she sleeps together with the husband before the condition has a chance to operate, she does not leave the marriage, as we said. So if they sleep together after he gives her this get on a condition, the get is now rendered invalid. So that wouldn't work because we're not trying to do that. We're trying to allow them to be married, live as husband and wife, but she has the power to end the marriage should she so desire, and she could never therefore be an aguna. Aval, however, if you hang them, this isn't conditioning, it's called a different verb in Hebrew, to hang it on a certain fixed time or a certain prescribed action. Lo higia get liyadaha betorat gidushin. When he delivered the get to her, it wasn't given for the purpose of divorcing. It was ella betorat pikadon. It was like a power of attorney. She could use it. It's like a pledge, like collateral. I give you a pledge. I mortgage my house to you. I give you, like a pawn shop, I give you my gold bracelet for 90 days. If I don't come back in 90 days, then you could sell it and you own it. If I do come back, then I get it back and you can't do anything with it in the meantime. Ad hazeman shekava, or ad shete'aseh ha'ma'aseh, until the time passes, or until the action that he articulated occurs, she's not divorced. She's just holding it like a lender holds collateral. That's why when the time comes or the action is performed, the get has to be in existence, unlike the case of a conditional get, because the divorcing is happening now. In a conditional divorce, it happens at the time of delivery, but it's incomplete. Here, at the time of delivery, nothing happens whatsoever. She's not divorced at all. And so therefore, if he's a Kohen, she could continue to live with him. She has to have in her property or in her control, or she has to go find it if she left it in the bank or in an airport locker, etc. Like the airport locker, or even hid it under a park bench where nobody goes. But if she stayed with him before if she marries a second guy before the triggering event of that divorce or the triggering lapse of time, she has to leave the second guy, and the child, if there's any child, it's a mamzer, because when she went to the second guy, she was a fully married woman, Shem Gerushin. There was no divorcing at all. It was just a pledge. It was like collateral. You don't own the collateral. It's just there for your use in case the borrower doesn't pay you. So the legal model here is a pledge, in Hebrew, pikadon. A debt secured by a pledge is considered paid if the borrower does not pay the loan when due. But then and only then does the lender have rights in the pledge. If he does not pay, the lender can simply take the pledge and need take no further collection actions. But the pledge is not operative as payment and remains the property of the borrower, who can ask for it back every night if it is sheets, or every day if it is his tools, as the biblical law. Once given, the lien on the pledge cannot be removed by the borrower. So why don't we use the full freedom provided under Jewish law to pre-deliver a get as security to the wife that is not operative unless and until the wife triggers it? That's the get talui b'ma'aseh. That's what I believe is the better alternative that we have today. As opposed to an agreement that relies on making a beddin, an arbitrator, to compel the husband to appear under $150 per diem penalty. What happens in the latter case if the husband just does not show up? Nothing. What happens if his name is Jeff Bezos? He laughs. $150 a day is less than he spends on lunch. Now, the Orthodox seem to unable to understand this law, so they conflate a get on a condition with a get dependent upon a subsequent act being performed, ignoring what Maimonides and the Talmud actually say. That's why I went through this whole distinction between a get on condition and the get talui b'ma'aseh, which I believe should be done today. A student of mine did this. His wife wrote up an article in a Jewish journal explaining the whole process. And some rabbi from, I won't say his name, but more than one Orthodox rabbis, they just wouldn't stop arguing with her, no matter what proof she brought. And of course, she asked me to give the proofs. I gave them, and the guy simply wouldn't listen. So there's an emotional bar to following the law. But this law is written in Maimonides' code, and it's extracted from the Talmud. As one can plainly see, the Hachamim addressed this situation around the year 350 CE with an elegant and very easily implemented protection for women. So does the prenup add anything new? Not really. When I first wrote this up, I made a little joke, let's all sing, it is almost Sukkot. And you usually read the book of Kohelet on Sukkot, and these Pisukim say there's nothing new under the sun. That's a little joke. What's new is that people don't want to follow the Talmud, but it would be an easy way out. So when we hear all this hullabaloo about the Aguna problem, and the problem was solved in the year 350 in the Persian academies who later produced the Talmud Babli, I'm a little puzzled. Anyhow, if we would ever succeed in having a Sephardic Beddin, maybe the Sephardic Jewish Brotherhood of America could organize an actual general jurisdiction Beddin where people can go to have litigation by people they trust and who know the law. That might be helpful. And in any case, I hope no one ever has to go through the trouble of divorce. But if you have daughters, like I do, and you're concerned about this kind of thing, the best way to do it is to give this get talui b'ma'aseh, and the ma'aseh, the action that triggers it, is solely in the control of your daughters. That way your daughters could never become an aguna, as we say in Ladino, a las bodas. We actually say a las bodas, con tu madre, et tu padre, et toda tu familia, and we say all these kind of nice things, which I haven't heard in a while. I'll take any questions anybody has. That's the end of my presentation. Bashtune, anybody?
If anybody has any questions, you can feel free either just allow the unmute function, so you're allowed to unmute yourself if you have a question, or you can also enter it in the chat and we can read it out. Chacham, I actually do have a question. I'm curious. I'm curious why this wasn't, after the Chachamim of Istanbul adopted this, yes. Why didn't this become a standard? Why didn't this become 50s on? You have these the Chachamim of Istanbul who represent a major powerhouse in knowledge. Why didn't all of a sudden just, and the Sephardic world seemed to accept this in wide part. Why wasn't it just, that's it, we're done, we're good?
Very good question. So there's the halacha, and then there's the history of the people who carry that halacha. For whatever reason, like I said, not one of the Bate Din which existed in Turkey, and there were some of the judges actually left the Ottoman Empire, went to various places. They never re-established themselves in any Sephardic city, not Atlanta, not Seattle, not Los Angeles, not New York, not Brazil, not Argentina, not Panama. I don't know why. Not even in Israel. So the chief rabbinate in Israel kind of took over. The Sephardic courts were just underneath them or didn't exist anymore. Like I know, for example, so in Aleppo, there were two communities really. There was the people who came from Spain, and there were people who were there from the time of the First Temple. They're called Mustarab, Arabicized Jews. Some of them, one of the families there is a descendant of King David. There was a Resh Galuta, head of exilarch, it's called, in the Persian Empire. His name was Bustani, Il-Bustani, which means the man of the garden, Bustani's garden. He had descendants, and they ended up in Halab, and their last name is Dayan, and they have the pedigree of their lineage going back to King David, and I've seen it. They published it. The last Ab Din, the last chief judge in that Halabi Bet Din, which was a general jurisdiction court. You could go there for litigation. People did. Even the Goyim came because they trusted the Jewish judges more than they trusted the Qadi. He leaves Halab and he goes to Tel Aviv and he tries to set up a Aleppian community with the court and a yeshiva, and for some reason people got in his way, or he was frustrated or depressed or disillusioned, and he went and lived in Brazil where his children had I think founded a bank, and they were very, very wealthy. He lived out the rest of his days in Brazil, and his project was abandoned. And he's the person who could most likely succeed in that endeavor, and it didn't. I don't know why the accumulated wisdom of centuries from Turkey never got transplanted somewhere, but it didn't. And there's no Beit Din in Istanbul now of anywhere. I don't even know if there is one at all. But there
is one under the Rabbanut that I do know, under the chief rabbin of Turkey. But yes, I don't think in the same caliber as 100 years ago.
Yeah, and I don't think Jews go there for business disputes, things like that. That was our strong suit, was we handled international business contracts because we were international traders. So you could own a ship from Istanbul. The insurance was underwritten by somebody in Livorno or Venice. The ship travels from Casablanca through the Suez Canal to Bombay, and it sinks. Who has to pay? What are the rules? What do the contracts say? What does the insurance say? So only the Sephardic court could do that, because only the Sephardic court could impose its decision on all the parties. Because you couldn't live in your home community if you refused to listen to the Beit Din. No one would do that. It's vergüenza. No one would do that. But we don't have that anymore. There's no social pressure, and there's no respect for the rabbis like we once had for the dayanim. So it's a good question, but we fizzled out. Now, we don't have to stay fizzled out. We could reconstitute, right? Like Yehuda Halevi
Inshallah.
About Am Yisrael, the nation of Yashen. They're sleeping, but their heart, even while they're asleep, even while they're in a coma, the heart is still beating. The heart is still awake. So that was his metaphor for the Jewish nation could reconstitute itself. But we'd have to take some kind of global perspective.
I just want to get one more question over here we have in the chat, which I thought was a really good question. I think we'll get to Rabbi Azus because I see you had a question as well. One says, growing up in Germany, the government actually came up with the idea of a marriage automatically terminating after a certain amount of time, unless the couple takes action. So we knew, let's say 7 years was discussed at the time for the kind of the year they would renew the marriage. The get that has a fixed term seems similar in the idea. Could something like this be done in halakha, or would the time requirement always lead to divorce and the time condition could no longer be taken back?
Yeah, I think if you set a specific time, once the time occurs, then you're divorced. You could remarry, but it's more difficult if the man is a Kohen. So I think it would be better for us if you want to give the woman the power. let her have the get talud b'maaseh, where she triggers the maaseh. Like it could be you sue me in court. It could be you go to the synagogue and you throw down 15 silver coins and you say in front of the rabbi and the committee, I'm sick of that husband. I'm triggering my maaseh. This is the trigger. I'm divorced. And I want you all to note that. You know, anything like that. If you have a lot of money, you could say, I need you. If you put up a billboard in Yankee Stadium, which we see during the between innings, where it says, I'm divorcing that son of a bitch. Okay, it could be any maaseh like that. But I think that has more room to choose later.
I think we had a question over here from Yossi Jesus.
Yes, sir. You look like your dad from 30 years ago.
I get that from time to time.
And he was a handsome guy, as we all know. So that's good.
Yes. I just had a quick question. Whether you have seen any indication as to whether the proposal of the Istanbul Beit Din was actually implemented in practice, or was it just stayed out there as a proposal and then petered out? I
think the latter.
Okay.
I'm guessing somebody may have tried it someplace, maybe in Cairo, by Yaakov Moshe Toledano. Cairo lasted a little longer than Istanbul and Izmir, but no, to my knowledge, no. I never saw it. It never became a regular known thing, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Any last questions from anyone else? Okay, with that, I want to thank Hacham Haleva again for this wonderful program this evening for this two-part series. And I want to thank him on behalf of the Sephardic Jewish Brotherhood of America and the Sephardic Digital Academy for all of you joining us. Just a reminder, this is a nonprofit initiative. We do depend on your support. If you're ever interested in sponsoring a class or issuing a donation in honor or memory of someone, please feel free to reach out to us. You can email us as info@sephardicbrotherhood.com. If you're ever interested in sponsoring a class or supporting us in other ways. I want to thank Chacham Haleva. Thank you so much again for doing this wonderful two-part series. And inshallah, we should see more amazing programs coming out of this partnership. And who knows, maybe even some amazing things that you mentioned that we need to do for the Sephardic community. Yeah. Maybe it will happen soon enough.
Okay, very good. Do I have another lecture in 2 weeks or something?
Yes, thank you for the reminder. We do have another excuse me, sorry. I'm trying to catch up on the schedule. We do have another part to modern contemporary issues of Sephardic Halakha, and I believe it's 2 weeks, right, Hacham? Am I getting that right?
Yes, I think so.
In 2 weeks, 2 days from now, we'll send a reminder out. We'll be dealing with another contemporary issue, most likely biking on Shabbat, but also there might be some other, yeah, exactly.
That's what I want to let everyone know. It's be the bicycle. Can you ride a bicycle on Shabbat with or without an Irub?
Perfect. So we'll be covering that in about 2 weeks, and we'll definitely send out the reminder as well.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Muchas buena.
Muchas buena. Thank you all so much.